Welcome to episode 3 of Saying Something Sober, the podcast where I decide the topic and it could be literally anything. Today's topic, Doctor Who's 60th anniversary and Christmas special. So after last week's more heavy subject matter, I thought I would go for something a little bit more lighthearted and topical. So this week's episode, I'll be talking about the 3 episodes that they released for Doctor Who's 60th anniversary, and then also the Christmas special that they released. So that is the episodes entitled, in order, The Star Beast, Wild Blue Yonder, The Giggle, and The Church on Ruby Road. Spoiler warning if you haven't seen any of those 3 episodes and the Christmas special. But first, I'll be talking about my coming to Doctor Who and why I like it so much and why it's even featuring as a topic on this podcast. Actually, before we get into it, I must start by being open. This is me recording a couple days after the previous clip, and I just wanted to talk about, in one of the previous episodes, I made use of an analogy that someone had told me and that I liked. The one about the ocean tide and how sometimes the tide is in and things are good and it might not even be to do with what's going on in your life. You just feel optimistic or content, not even necessarily joyful or happy. The tide is in and the sun is shining kind of thing. But with that, the analogy obviously refers to the inevitability that the tide will go out. And after that, the tide will come back in, but we always have to be prepared for the time at which the tide will go out. And we don't really know when, we don't really know why. It's just one of those things. You know, you can't have the clouds without the sun. The tide can't be in without it being out before. So, for me, at some point last week, the tide went out. And the tide was even out at the weekend. It was out during the week. And the tide was in when I recorded last episode. But at some point between releasing that episode and the beginning of the week, the tide went out seemingly overnight. And I'm still going because I know that the tide will come back in and I feel like it's coming back in. But I just wanted to start with that. Anyway, with that out of the way, Doctor Who. So, answering the necessary questions, why am I such a fan of Doctor Who? And what are my thoughts about the previous seasons? Well, to be honest, I watched Doctor Who every Saturday from the very start of the new series, so not the classic. I'd never really heard of it or watched the classic series. I think the new series with Christopher Eccleston started in 2006 or 7, so I was 7 or 8. And as a kid, I was obsessed with it. Everything I had was Doctor Who, and mostly after season 1. So David Tennant was like a god to me. It's probably what began my love for horror, really. I mean, I look back and I was actually terrified, but I guess I loved it. I don't know. There's so many stories from my family of me like hiding behind my hands or behind the sofa. I remember, it's still to this day actually, the episode that scares me the most is, or that just gives me the heebie-jeebies, is The Girl in the Fireplace. And it's because of those creepy clockwork doll things. They were so haunting and clownish, and they have this like expression on their face that's just like menacing. And Doctor Who did some doll stuff later on in Matt Smith's era, and that was creepy too, but nothing like The Girl in the Fireplace. And there's a bit in the episode where they're talking. The lady, Madame de Pompadour, is talking in her bedroom with the Doctor, and she asks, or the Doctor asks, "What's that ticking sound?" And she answers, that's the clock. And the doctor responds, but that clock is broken. And then they like look under the bed, and one of those clockwork things has been under the bed like the whole time. And I just remember that really scared me. I mean, as a kid, I used to sleep with a light on, let alone, have things under my bed. I mean, I used to sleep with a light on, and no wonder I slept with a light on. But I still watched it weekly, and now as an adult, I watch horror films all the time. It's like some of my favorite genres. So, what did I think of previous seasons? Well, like I said, I started when the new series with Christopher Eccleston started. I was watching it religiously from then. And I kind of grew up with the show, really. And I remember I used to collect all the collectibles. I had the Doctor Who card game. I remember Battles in Time, Exterminate. They had the Daleks on it. And I think I also got the second series of cards, which was like the Cybermen versus the Daleks ones. And I also had these Doctor Who Power Rollers things, which were like these characters on these plastic crappy toys. They had like the metal balls in the bottom of them, and you'd roll them, and I guess it was kind of like Beyblades, but not really. Like, I was obsessed with the show, and I look back now, and it's weird how, like, growing up queer, you feel that you hide it from everything. You feel that it's locked away in a box, and that not even you know how to open that box. You've kind of purposefully forgotten where you've hidden the key. But reflecting as an adult, and even reflecting as somebody who's sober, there's these patterns, these little hints, like breadcrumbs, all along the way in your childhood and in your like time not being sober, that are just like blatantly obvious that there's something going on. So blatantly obvious that you were queer. And kind of comical that I was so obsessed with Doctor Who because it's so openly a queer show. I mean, it's always been a wildly woke show. There are so many examples of it playing with gender fluidity and the concept as a spectrum of sexuality as a spectrum and a gender as a spectrum. In fact, it's always had that kind of queer undertone. Like Captain Jack, there's so many jokes that he makes about how he fancies a certain alien race, and then he will make some comment about how they don't really have a gender, this alien race that he fancies, or something like that. And it's just like that right there, that little comment is referring to gender fluidity. I mean, Doctor Who, as a character, he became a woman, and people were upset at the time, but I mean, they came to accept it. And even just that concept of someone who isn't really fitting with this human social structure it's wildly woke, and so it's insane to me to see people responding to the more modern Doctor Who with this rigidity and saying like, oh, it's gone woke, it's gone woke. It's never not been woke. It can't go woke. It was woke. I mean, I don't woke is such an overused term, but it's always been a show that is looking to push the boundaries of identity and push the boundaries of understanding people, understanding humans. For me, those earlier seasons, especially David Tennant's era, were like the peak of TV as a kid. Donna Noble's season is obviously like one of the best seasons of that kind of show, sci-fi show out there. Donna Noble has left the library. Donna Noble has been saved. Do you know what I mean? I loved uh, Matt Smith as well. The Amy Pond River Song, that's a really good season too. I kind of fell off of the show around season 7, which I think is Matt Smith's last season. And I remember at the time, I can't remember how old I was, but I remember at the time there was an episode about Wi-Fi going evil. And at the time I felt, oh, this show has changed. It's now for kids. It's now for kids. And in a way, Doctor Who has always been for kids, but it's always also been for adults. And I think at that age, I was so resistant to the show changing because they'd gone through that rebranding kind of when David Tennant left. It had this more orangey kind of sci-fi branding, and then it kind of cleaned itself up for Matt Smith's era. And they started to do more CGI stuff. They started to do more out there stuff. And I think that last season for Matt Smith with Clara and her appearing in kind of 3 episodes, and then she's actually been throughout his life, and she's there to save him or whatever. I didn't resonate. It didn't resonate with me at the time. I rewatched it all. I rewatched Doctor Who in lockdown, and it really wasn't that bad. I mean, dinosaurs on a spaceship, I really can't get behind. But as a whole season 7, it is actually it's an all right season. There's nothing bad to say about it really, but it's not one of the best. And then it went into Peter Capaldi, and I was kind of on and off with the show. I think I wasn't watching every episode. I've now seen them all. But I did watch all of Bill's season. I think that is Peter Capaldi's last season. And that is it's a really good season, actually. I think it starts with Heaven Sent, which is, I think, one of the highest rated episodes of Doctor Who. And it is a really good episode. But Bill as a companion is up there with Martha as the most underserved companion in Doctor Who history. Such a cruel fate for Bill, and Martha is just so not regarded well by the Doctor, it seems. Like she didn't get the love or, you know. And then we head into Jodie Whittaker's seasons, and I watched her first season as it came out because it was the first time that Doctor Who had done something completely new with who the Doctor was, and that was interesting. And I enjoyed it on a base level. Chris Chibnall, I think, was the showrunner, and I don't think he kind of really understood what Doctor Who was about. Jodie Whittaker's first season is good. It's fine. But I think from there it goes downhill. So season 12 and 13 it goes downhill. And I haven't actually watched those. I've watched the finale of season 13, the Flux one, and it's difficult to watch. And so as I head into kind of my commentary about this 60th anniversary and the Christmas special, I have to give Russell T Davies some credit because he was handed what is kind of a pile of rubbish and had to make something great out of it. It's 60th anniversary, that's monumentous, it really, in TV. And he was handed kind of a pile of rubbish to doll up into a big 60th anniversary. And I think he did the best that he could. I don't think the 60th anniversary is perfect, and I think there are a few things in it that lead me to a little bit of concern about the future of the show. Things that, because the precedent has been set, when future seasons and future problems come around, like how are we going to deal with those with the new knowledge of what is possible in mind? But I did really enjoy the 60th anniversary. My one initial complaint was that I wish it came out in a 3-day row. I think the 3-week weekly structure was a bit weird. I think the first episode everyone was really hyped for, I was really hyped for, and then it kind of fell off in terms of hype. I don't think the show fell off at all. I think the viewership, you can see it's huge, but I think had it been like a bit closer together, there would have been this feeling that it was this big monumentous thing, and that each episode that led to the Giggle was connected. Whereas I feel like with the weekly structure, I watched the Star Beast and I kind of was like, yeah, that was all right. Then I watched the next one and it'd been a week, so it wasn't top of mind. And then we got to the Giggle and it was like, oh, this feels like a big moment, but it doesn't feel like a big moment. So that was my only initial complaint. As part of this episode and preparing for this episode, I rewatched all the episodes. And one thing for this first one, so the Star Beast, the first episode of the 60th anniversary, one thing I found when watching it the first time is that I was hyped and I was really ready and I really enjoyed it and I thought it was a good starter. And I think after then seeing the following episodes and now rewatching it, this episode was okay. It was fine. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't groundbreaking. It was fine. And I think that's okay. I mean, I do wish that maybe the first episode of the 60th anniversary was a bit bigger, but I understand that it was building to the giggle. I just think that if it's all building to the giggle, then there needs to be some sort of thread throughout it. They talk a lot about in this episode, oh, why has this face come back? And oh, it's all coincidence. It's all leading to Donna and all of this, but it that didn't feel like we got an answer to that. Like, why was it all leading to Donna? Why was there all of this coincidence? I mean, Church on Ruby Road goes on to talk about the goblins and coincidence. Were the goblins involved in Star Beast in this episode? It's all a bit unclear in terms of answers, and maybe we will get answers later on. Maybe those things will be explored in season 14 or season 1, which I refuse to call it season 1. But I think if it's going to be explored, because I know that season 14 is going to be a bit more kind of magic and mystery rather than sci-fi and tech, then I think we're going to need to have callbacks to these characters. At least there's one character that I want, which is Rose Noble. And I think we didn't really get to see enough of her in the episode, enough of them in the episode. I think the character was a bit bigged up in the production. Yasmin Finney from Heartstopper, and she just wasn't in it as much as I thought she was going to be. But her role was important, and I did appreciate that kind of way of tying the knot with the meta crisis. It's been years of that storyline being done, and though I do really love season 4, and I think that storyline of Donna Noble having to forget is just so heartbreaking, and the fact we only got one season of Donna Noble is wild to me because it feels like she's been around in Doctor Who forever. But to finally have that kind of happy ending is quite nice. And I do enjoy Star Beast. I think Miriam Margolyes was really good in it. It opens a lot of questions, which I think is what it's meant to do. I think with the close of season 13, we knew something was coming, but with the close of season 13, there wasn't too much to go off. There wasn't too many unanswered questions, really. I think there had been some big moves made, like getting rid of Gallifrey again was huge. They'd just come back, they'd not really done much, and now they're gone again. So it felt like season 13 kind of closed with a tied knot. There weren't too many loose ends. So I guess this first episode really had to open a lot of loose ends, and it did do that. The Star Beast was quick and it was twisty, which I appreciated. The Meep being evil, I kind of didn't actually see coming. And there's these kind of new aliens, the Roth. They're cool. I like when Doctor Who starts to make new kind of creatures and aliens, because I think that's where it really shines. You know, some of the best monsters from Doctor Who come back again and again. Weeping Angels, Sontar and Daleks, Cybermen. I know Russell T Davies has said we probably won't see many of the same kind of creatures again, but I hope that there's at least callbacks to kind of the world that we love and know. I mean, in the Star Beast, obviously the questions opened were, who is the Meep's boss? I think the way that the Meep seems to pose that question of like, oh, my boss has two hearts, I think is what is implied, makes me think that it's the Master, because I guess at this point, the Master hasn't been defeated by the Toy Master, because that seems to happen when the Doctor incurs the rules in Wild Blue Yonder, where he does this line of salt, that's when the Toy Master is unleashed. And so I think the Master is still around in the Star Beast. At least this is my theory. So I think the implication is the Meep's boss is the Master, Two Hearts, or actually, just thinking now, it could be the Rani, which I've seen theories that Ruby's neighbor is the Rani. That's why she can break the fourth wall, and that's why she kind of winks at the camera and says, "What? You've not seen a TARDIS before?" So maybe the Meep's boss is the Rani, but not sure how that would work with her character. So in the episode, they obviously talk about all this coincidence, and it's all kind of circling around Donna. There's little moments where the Doctor is kind of stumbling across her. The moment where he's following the unit people and he's walking or running down a road and he kind of just hears Donna screaming because she's screaming about the Meep, and he's like, how have we kind of followed back to her now? And it's obviously this whole kind of sort of slapstick comedy of Donna's mum trying to pretend like it's not all there because she doesn't want Donna to remember, because in her eyes, Donna will die as soon as she remembers. And it's all kind of building to the inevitability, even as it is playing out, it feels inevitable that Donna will have to remember, or she'll have to take on the meta crisis to save the world again. And I think it is feeling like a big moment, and it does feel as it's happening that you're worried that Donna's going to die. But I also am aware that most people knew that she was probably going to be in all three episodes. In fact, a lot of people probably knew she definitely was going to be in all three episodes. So there is this element of like, she's not actually going to die, something's going to happen. But in that first episode, we obviously meet Shirley, who's the unit scientist who's in the wheelchair. She's comes back, and she's probably, I assume, going to be a returning character in the following seasons. And she's a really cool character. You love to see the kind of representation, especially with what I liked was that the representation kind of took on the burden that it was representation, with the little comments like, we all have weapons in our wheelchair, or when the unit bodyguard is going up the stairs and he apologizes and she says, don't make me feel like a burden, or something like that. Don't make me a problem. Just get up there. And I really like that, because I think it didn't feel like performative representation. It felt like it was meaningful. And she is a great character I hope will be coming back. There's the cool and somewhat funny moment where the Doctor gets out the car and invokes the Shadow Proclamation and puts on the judge wig and seems to question the Meep and the Roth warriors, and to see whether there's actually validity behind what is going on, because the taxi doesn't have any marks on it. And as I was doing a rewatch, obviously I knew it was coming to this, and what I like is those little moments that hint something is, like, if you had been eagle-eyed, you would have noticed that the bullets weren't doing anything to the taxi, and that nothing was really happening too drastically, and they all kind of seemed to get out alive, and you would have been a bit suspicious. So the fact that they called them back on it is like, oh, this is, it's not just them not committing to trying to kill off a character or something. This is part of the show. And then obviously the Meep turns evil and eyes go from big wide to frowny, and it's a good funny little moment. And then we lead on to the climax of the episode, where the Doctor and Donna find themselves stuck in the spaceship that's gonna destroy London and take off. And it's all leading to that inevitability that Donna will have to remember. And you can tell that, the window shuts down, and it's all leading there, and so you know it's going to happen. You're just kind of waiting to see how they do it or whether they do it. And when it hits, there is this feeling that it's possible that Donna is dying. You don't really know, but majority of me is aware that she probably isn't going to die. And then she doesn't. And they kind of go with this idea that she passed down the meta crisis or part of the meta crisis and was able to share it with her daughter, and that allowed her to let go of the meta crisis and kind of be free of this burden. And I think the moment in which she begins to remember and he's unlocking her with this sentence, that's where you see the old Donna come back. There'd obviously been these kind of emotional moments earlier in the episode where she's saying she like looks to her side and she doesn't know what she's looking for, and then she's like, "What have I lost?" And weirdly, as I was rewatching the episode, these little moments of Donna talking to the camera and saying things like, "Sometimes I lie in bed and I think, what have I lost?" And that is so relatable of a comment. Obviously, in the world of Doctor Who, we know what she's lost, but to be lying in your bed and thinking, what have I lost? Or what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal? Or why do I behave like this? Is so relatable, especially as somebody who's started sobriety. Because back then, I would lie in bed thinking, why do I do this to myself? Why? Like, actually, why? And then I'd go out and do it again. You know, it's like someone had, erased my memory of all the other times that going too far on a night out just ruined my mental stability. I'd be lying in bed again thinking, what have I lost that has made me behave like this? What has happened to me to make me so oblivious of the damage that I'm doing to myself? But the episode ends and Donna is fine, and we hear about the Meeps boss, and there's kind of little nuggets of information that we need to cling on to for season 14, because I don't think these are going to go away. But we end the episode and they're talking about going to see Wilf, and obviously R.I.P. Bernard Cribbins. They get in the TARDIS and Donna is kind of anecdotally talking about this time that she was so clumsy with a cup of coffee that she spilled on her laptop or whatever. And then obviously coincidentally she spills it on the TARDIS and it makes it go haywire. And thinking of where it led them to the end of the universe, and thinking of the fact that Donna's mum didn't want her to go, this is just obviously hugely coincidental. And so it feels like there's so many things happening here that are coincidence or chance or something greater than what Doctor Who has been before, which is about kind of science and monsters, and this idea of coincidence and chance keeps coming back. And obviously we see in the Christmas episode that coincidence and chance is like a huge theme of the episode. And I wonder if this will keep coming back, and if we'll get answers to why that face came back, why David Tennant came back, why everything seemed to be revolving around Donna. But then we lead into Wild Blue Yonder. So Starbeast as an episode, I would probably rate it middle of the road, maybe 3 out of 5. It was good, I enjoyed it. Watching it as the first episode, I felt that it was really good. And then I watched Wild Blue Yonder and I was like, oh, okay, so the first episode was just fine. I think after so long with Doctor Who, it was a good opener because it made me feel like Doctor Who was back. And the episode at the time felt like a good episode. I think it kind of then pales in comparison to the following 2 and then the Christmas special. So moving on to the next episode, Wild Blue Yonder, the second episode of the 3 David Tennant episodes. Now, This is really where I felt that Doctor Who was back. To me, this was kind of like a turning point. The episode to me is it's not kind of up there with any of the best episodes ever, and it's far from perfect, but it did bring back kind of that old feeling of Doctor Who. It felt like one of those classic Who storylines where there's all these little bits that kind of connect to each other and everything feels expansive and in world. For me, some of the issues with the Jodie seasons and the episodes storylines, especially the kind of mid-season ones that don't tend to connect to the wider story arc or to any other episodes, the kind of one-off episodes, is that they feel in a vacuum of themselves. You know, the characters arrive to this time, to this place, they recognize the issue, they solve the issue, but the whole thing doesn't really feel connected to the rest of the world of the show, really, especially without having that tie-in to the rest of the season. With Wild Blue Yonder, there were a few connective bits to the kind of 60th anniversary, but there weren't that many. And within the actual meat of the plot, I don't really think there was any. And I get that there were references and things that had consequences later, but I mean, the mystery and the villain and the resolution kind of had nothing to do with what we'd already seen. But still, it felt kind of thematically, and kind of the story and the narrative felt very within the same universe, even within the same universe as the pre-Chibnall seasons. So I really loved this episode. It's really where I started to feel like the old Doctor Who was back. Though a criticism I do have is that it feels slightly throwaway, as it's the mid-episode, second of the three. It seems to just kind of bridge that gap between the two. Like, it could have been any story, really. It just needed to be a second episode just to kind of fill the gap. And that is kind of affirmed by the fact that Russell T Davies said in an interview that this wasn't the initially planned episode and that they kind of pulled it together last minute. However, I did find it actually kind of scary, or suspenseful, I should say, tense. The moment that Donna is in that dark hallway and we hear the kind of footsteps pounding on metal grate heading towards her, and it's kind of just a long, like, lingering shot of her face as these pounding footsteps head towards her, was actually scary. And I was obsessed with that moment. I remember thinking in that moment that Doctor Who is back. That moment made me think of the girl in the fireplace when the clock isn't working, and it's actually the ticking of the monster under the bed. It made me think of Silence in the Library when the guy keeps saying, "Hey, who turned out the lights?" And then his skull falls to the front of his helmet and we see he's been killed. It's that kind of tension that has an element of, like, unpredictability about it. I also really enjoyed the salt line. I thought it was a classic kind of Doctor Who trick and classic of David Tennant's Doctor, really, I think. The kind of almost playground things that the Doctor does to stay off the monsters is always a fun way. It also, the salt line kind of connects it to the next episode with the Toy Master. As the Doctor says, he invoked the rules of play or whatever, which, you know, airy-fairy, but I'll roll with it. The small references to the Flux, I knew that there would be probably some references. I thought it was interesting, the small references, because there were very, very few, and you didn't necessarily need to have seen the season before to get it. You know, you just need to know the Doctor's been through some stuff and that he's not feeling great and he doesn't know who he is, kind of thing. The villains didn't really matter I don't think the no things. I think the thing that I really loved, what made it Doctor Who-esque for me, was the slow reveal that the whole time the ship had been set to slowly self-destruct. I thought that was a really kind of smart, cyclical way to connect the episode in this satisfying moment. I think the questions of the episode were raised and answered, but enough questions were left unanswered for the next episode. Again, there was this moment where we're almost tricked into thinking Donna will die. And to be honest, this one nearly did get me. I nearly thought she was actually going to die. It all just seemed so close. But when she didn't die, I kind of thought to myself, okay, fool me once, fool me twice. I don't think that they're going to try and kill Donna next episode. So in my head, I kind of was affirmed in the fact that I don't think Donna is going to die in this 60th anniversary. I think she's going to survive. I want to linger on these no things, the villains, the creatures. They weren't, unlike a lot of Doctor Who, they weren't really the focus of the episode, at least for me. A lot of Doctor Who seems to be about seeing and experiencing a monster from the dark recesses of whichever writer's mind it came from. And a lot of the time they had this interesting or cool twist or ability that allows them to make the episode exciting. I mean, a great example is the Weeping Angels, who are able to create a scary moment because of this ability that they have. But with the no things, I think for me, it was a smart way to make the two characters, Donna and the Doctor, confront themselves almost. These creatures weren't just kind of envisions of themselves, it was like envisions of the worst part of themselves. It was like meeting yourself and knowing that that person knows everything that you know about you, which is terrifying in a way, but it shouldn't be, you know. I think weirdly, the idea of meeting myself in a monstrous form with really long arms is like kind of what I feel you have to do when you start sobriety. You know, you have to confront this like monstrous version of yourself, which sounds dramatic, but you do it a lot. You reflect on your behavior and these beliefs that you hold that just aren't true, that this kind of monstrous version of yourself forces you to realize. One thing I remember kind of realizing is that every time I was drinking too much or going out too much or partying too hard, in my head I had this almost shame about it. A shame so much that I was creating a monstrous version of myself in my head that was I was almost imagining is what it looked like, you know, and it was always so much worse than it was. It was always so much more extravagant than it was. And I didn't remember that my head was doing this. It was almost so subconscious, but it's like these flashes of this monstrous version of myself. And I remember it was one of my first sessions with a support group where someone said something about their inner child or, you know, disappointing themselves. And it all kind of came flooding back of how what I take now as my inner child or my inner self shaming me for the things that I was doing because I was so disappointed in myself. So the Doctor having to confront his own kind of trauma in this episode by confronting himself, you know, the thing he seems at this point to know the least, it's a really interesting concept. I mean, the episode and that moment is filmed in what looks to be like the same set as the previous episode. I get they were probably trying to cut costs, so I'll suspend my disbelief. But this moment of him having to outthink himself, how do you slow down your brain when you can't, is an interesting way to think about processing trauma. How do you stop yourself or your inner saboteur from allowing to run fast enough that it it beats you, that it overtakes you? How do you slow your inner saboteur down so that it doesn't just become you? But I really enjoyed this episode. It's probably my favorite of the 360th anniversary episodes. I'd give it maybe like a 4 out of 5, maybe a 4.5 out of 5. But it was a very enjoyable episode and definitely one that felt like Doctor Who was back and back for good, back for real. Moving on to The Giggle, starring Neil Patrick Harris and Ncuti Gatwa. I just have to say that I love Ncuti and I'm really happy that he was selected as the next Doctor. I find him hilarious in Sex Education, and already after these 2 episodes that we've seen him in, have good faith in him as the Doctor. For me, with The Giggle, the first half of the episode is better than the second. I enjoy Neil Patrick Harris as the villain. I think he is very animated and emotive. Acting does fit this villain and other villain types that we've seen in Doctor Who. He does make this villain seem intimidating, though at times it might come off as too much, especially with like the German accent. Maybe the first half of the episode, especially with the puppet, the Giggle, the bit in the toy maker's house, that bit was much more like one of those kind of abstract Doctor Who episodes, the scary kind of creepy ones that look to kind of take some real aspect of life and turn it into this monster, supernatural, otherworldly thing. Like, I'm thinking Listen, I'm thinking The God Complex, I'm thinking Night Terrors. I don't think that the second half of the episode was necessarily bad, just I think it was a bit maybe anticlimactic with the way that the toy maker is defeated. I think the episode does really well, as a lot of the previous episodes, I feel like I've said this a lot, it does really well to set up stuff for the future. There is so much in this episode that on my rewatch, I kind of realized I didn't pick up on. So what I did pick up on my first watch was the Master is in the gold tooth and someone picks up the gold tooth at the end of the episode, obviously. But there's also mention of the one who waits. There's so many little bits that we obviously know are coming back. I'm just kind of excited to see what they mean. I did enjoy the ending because it's fun and it's new, and I think the way that it tied up at the end was interesting. I think what I want from Doctor Who, at least me personally, is just something new, shake it up, picking Ncuti as the Doctor is doing something different. The way that the TARDIS looks in the inside, the clean white, that's new, that's exciting. The design of the sonic screwdriver, that's new, that's exciting. I just want it to be exciting, and doing the same kind of formula of stuff over the years has gotten boring. I do think that the entire third episode and the build to the end does make me feel that this 60th anniversary should have really been a 3-parter. I think if it had slowly built up the threat, growing the tension across the 3 episodes, the payoff would have been a bit better. If you had maybe small reveals throughout that, are these Easter eggs for maybe season 14 or Easter eggs for the later episode, it would have felt a bit more like that the Tourmaker was this big villain. I think the fact that he came and was defeated in one episode makes it feel not that big of a deal. I think Imagine the Doctor arrives in London and it looks the way it does in episode 3, but this is episode 1. And then through the chaos, not only is he kind of seeing Neil Patrick Harris over and over again, but he keeps bumping into Donna. And then maybe at the end of episode 1, after some small investigation, she gets her memory back. And then for the whole next 2 episodes, we're kind of waiting for her to die almost. And then we get maybe the reveal at the end of the 2nd episode that Rose Noble is taken on part of the Meta Crisis. I think you could have set it across 3 days almost. The first day, the first episode, second day, the second episode. And it would have felt so fast paced and intense and like this big Doctor Who moment. You could have even built for the tension of Donna's survival, grow it in question and hold off on the Meta Crisis being solved so quickly. I did enjoy the 60th anniversary. It had been so long since I'd watched Doctor Who properly, and it did make me feel that Doctor Who was back, and it did make me feel hopeful for season 14, but I wish that the build of hype and the build of tension and the build of threat and drama had been more unmissable and more all-encompassing. One moment I want to pick out is the summary of the Doctor's companions that Neil Patrick Harris does as like puppets in that set. I think it was a really interesting moment that kind of ties in that later conclusion that the Doctor has almost pushed himself so far that he's snapped in two. In fact, the whole storyline of Tennant's face coming back now seems to me to be this like PTSD storyline. In a way, you could almost read that David Tennant's face coming back is in part like a relapse, some form of a relapse. His face has come back almost as a reminder of who he used to be and as a reminder of where to get back to. I think these 3 episodes have a lot in them for me to relate to. The way that the Doctor is kind of made to be on this journey of recovery, of restitution, is a nice way to tie that end because we feel sympathetic towards him. And of course, to see his happy ending with Donna is something we, the fans, definitely want. Also, there's something to be read into the socio-political commentary in the episode. I've spoke about earlier how Doctor Who has always been a show that makes comments and is woke and is always pushing the envelope a little bit. And the commentary around the Giggle and how it's embedded into our screens, bringing out everyone's worst qualities. The Doctor even stresses that it didn't create these qualities, it just kind of amplifies them. There's so much in that in relation to the current climate that we're living in. And it feels like the show is almost implying that we're living in this alternate universe where the Giggle succeeded and the Doctor was defeated, or the Doctor never existed. The universe where everyone's worst qualities are constantly on show. With that in mind, that's what I'm trying not to be. I'm trying to be the most authentic, best version of myself, right? This journey that I'm on is constant self-analysis, constant thinking about how I can be more me, but also be more the good parts of me. I'm trying to unhear the Giggle. And then just lastly on the Giggle, I want to talk about the bi-generation. It's kind of the elephant in the room, I guess. Ultimately, I think it's a smart move for where the show is. I think what was left behind by the previous season, the state that the Doctor had to be in emotionally, and how that would have impacted season 14 had something not intervened, would have been, in my opinion, negatively. I think to have this almost cloud weighing over the Doctor for the entirety of the rest of the show, or however long, would have dampened the fun. especially the elements and the episodes that are meant to be fun. So I think splitting the generation into two and making the Doctor go on this journey of recovery, or not even journey, conclude the Doctor's story in a way and allow him to almost open a new chapter, open a new book, but still be the same person is it was the only resolution, and I couldn't have thought of it myself, so I think it was definitely a smart move. It does make me nervous for the future of the show. I think a precedent has obviously been set, and Doctor Who has never been a show that can really jump the shark. I think the show consistently jumps the shark. I think the show is about jumping the shark. Seasons probably 3, 4, 5. There were bits you could classify as jumping the shark. So I think it's not necessarily about jumping the shark, but the precedent has been set that this can happen. And so when an issue or dilemma arises in the future that requires a resolution, maybe a resolution that's bigger than this, a bigger deal than this, then the question will be posed, why can't we just do another bi-generation? And whether there's answers to that, we're yet to see. And then finally, moving on to the church on Ruby Road. I don't want to linger too much on this episode because A, it is an introductory episode to not only Ncuti in his first full-length episode as the Doctor, but also an introduction to Ruby, who will be his companion for at least a season. And obviously, as a Christmas episode, it's going to be lighter hearted. It's not going to be as heavy handed with story and plot and movement of the characters. So I don't want to criticize it too much, in a sense that it did what it was told to do, which was introduce the characters and have a kind of fun, light-hearted episode that doesn't have too many consequences for Christmas. The consequential episodes will come in season 14. So with that said, I liked the episode. I thought it was good that they went for kind of iconic and memorable over trying to change the game or some big villain. I thought the song was fun. I thought the idea behind the goblins was cool, like the idea of consequence being this controlling factor. I read an article that said that the Christmas special kind of existed in that space that Doctor Who kind of flourishes in, which is finding kind of everyday concepts, everyday things that people struggle with or think about, and create some kind of spin on it that is monsters, aliens. With this, it's like the idea of everyday consequence, everyday chance is actually the meddling of goblins. Davina McCall featured in the episode, obviously an icon. Overall, I enjoyed the episode. I thought it was good for a Christmas episode. It was fun. You don't want a Christmas episode to be too heavy-handed because it's Christmas. People aren't looking to wallow or, get into the weeds of a TV show. And it was also an opener to not only Ncuti, but to Ruby Sunday. And the first season doesn't start until May, so if they were to go too much into it, then we'd have to wait months to find out more. I thought the introduction of Ruby was interesting. The questions surrounding her mum, the questions surrounding the neighbour. There's lots to be delved into for the season ahead, so that is exciting. However, I felt that Ruby was maybe a bit lackluster, or not lackluster, maybe that's harsh, but that she was familiar. To me, she felt like Clara. There's nothing necessarily distinguishable about her other than the fact that she's an orphan who was left at this church. And that's obviously going to be a key part of the season. So it just feels a bit boring or safe. I think seasons before where they've done something really exciting with the companion is when it starts to be really fun. I think Bill is a really good companion. That season with Bill is so good. And the fact she only gets one season is devastating. Amy and Rory was even kind of unconventional at the time. A duo, a couple. I think Ruby doesn't necessarily stand out. And maybe I'll be proved wrong with the season ahead. This is just her introduction and this is just my first kind of impression. But like if you compare her to someone like Rose, Rose at least was kind of from a counsellor state. She was a bit, she had that accent. Ruby doesn't really have a distinguishable accent, and you're not really sure where she's from. I don't know. I didn't think that the character was bad, and I think she wasn't unlikable. I just wish there was kind of more to go off of in terms of knowing who she is or being able to categorize her as this type of person, maybe. However, Shooty was obviously great. I think he's kind of really gotten stuck into the Doctor role like straight away, and you can already feel that he's present. My point about the companion being boring and kind of they're not doing something different with this is weird because with the rest of the show, it seems like they're doing that. I mean, picking Shooty, like I've said, was unconventional in a way. The TARDIS design is now completely different. The sonic screwdriver is now completely different. So much of the show is exciting because it's new. But I just feel that that falls down with Ruby. Regardless, I think the goblins were funny. I think the song is annoyingly catchy. And I think what we saw at the end, the twist of like this world that existed without Ruby, was really interesting. Because there's a lot of questions there, because Ruby makes a remark about like, oh, you were here and then you were not. But what we saw was almost the opposite with the Doctor, that she was there and then she was not. So was that another dimension that was created, or was that another timeline? Lots to think about, really. And I think it really sets up the season ahead well. Back onto Ruby, and this may be a spoiler alert, so you've been warned. But we know now that she's only got one season, or at least she partially leaves the show after one season, and that a new companion will be coming on. And that could be to do with her storyline. And this is the one thing about the companion right now that I like. I think I was complaining to my friends when it all got announced that it feels like Ruby will get 3 seasons and it'll be another formulaic kind of Doctor companion trio. One thing that annoyed me when Jodie Whittaker's era ended is that her companion, I can't remember her name, didn't continue on. The companion ended with her, and we lost that kind of like interesting transition phase between the two. And it just feels like this formulaic structure of companions has come forward that is just boring. So to hear that we know that the companion structure moving forward won't be that excites me, and I await to see what the season will look like. Only a couple of months now, but looking forward to it and reading up on all the details. This has been Saying Something Sober, keeping me sober 215 days as of recording episode 3.